Welcome everyone to this session. So we will be diving deep into the different session of the e-learning for the foundation bit of it. So my name is Josephat. I'm an ecologist. So yes, so today we will be looking at different aspects of the course. So we'll look at the foundation. We look dig into the foundation bit of it, the challenges. We introduce the KMGBF. Then we look at target 3. From target 3, then we proceed to look at the data sources. And then tomorrow we'll have maybe a different session according to the way it's been arranged in the outline of the e-learning course. So again, my name is Josephat. So maybe we'll start with maybe the foundation bit of it. So when we're talking about the conservation aspect, so what are we conserving? Maybe on a bigger scale, we're talking about an ecosystem. So we need to maybe understand when we say an ecosystem, what does that one mean? So the reason as to why we're doing a definition of the ecosystem is to maybe try to see how broad and the different way people are using an ecosystem, or maybe the different aspect each and everyone is working in an ecosystem. So at times we could have people who are looking at maybe one organism, or maybe a particular species. So for example, let's talk about a rhino. Yeah, so when we're talking about a rhino, so anytime you want to do about conservation of the rhino, you need to know where it's found and the resources it's using. So that's why we're saying sometimes when we're defining an ecosystem, you can define an ecosystem based on maybe when it's animal focused. At times we're looking at also people who are looking at the different flow of materials. For example, the nutrient cycling. Yeah? So anytime you are doing the way the different nutrients are converging to a certain area, where do they come from, or where they are sinks? So that's also another way. When you are now focused on that, then you can define an ecosystem based on the process focused or the material flow in a certain area. Then we have now, sometimes you also define an ecosystem depending on maybe a climate of an area. Yeah, so sometimes when you're talking about an arid ecosystem, or maybe a rain-fed ecosystem, so those are some of the different ways we can define the ecosystem. So depending on how you, or the work you are working on, or maybe the area that you want to venture in, you can try to define an ecosystem using those different aspects. So if we combine all of these, or we simplify this definition, we come up with a summary of an ecosystem as comprising all the organisms and the interaction, both biotic and abiotic in those bit of it. So when we're saying now we want to maybe do conserve an area or the ecosystem, yeah. So you need to define maybe the boundaries. That way, it makes it easy for you to do the budgeting of that area, or maybe allocating the different resources that are required to go about conserving that area. So the delineation bit of it, we could use the term mapping in a simplified manner, but during the course, we'll dig into the different aspect of when we say talking. Maybe. Yeah. So please, somebody should mute their mic. Yeah. So we see the mapping bit of it. So during now the full course of this, we'll be talking about mapping, but then you have to look at it from different angles that we are talking about. So, so something we should know that because on a global scale, we don't have like an ecosystem map. Currently, there is an initiative that's trying to look at how we're supposed to map all the ecosystems. That way, it's easy for different people to know where the ecosystems are found. Yes. So again, maybe when we now talk about the ecosystem mapping, what are the objective of doing that? So like I have said in a previous slide, it has different ways, or it helps us in different aspects. So when you say we want to identify our hotspots, that's when we talk about ecosystem mapping. So you map an ecosystem so that you are able to identify a hotspots. Again, if you want to provide integration into the spatial planning, so you want to plan for a space. So let's say, for example, marine. How do you plan for that when you've not mapped that area? So that's why you need to map marine ecosystem so that you're able to integrate it to the spatial development. So we'll dig into the biodiversity bit of it maybe in a later stage, but just to give us a glimpse of what the biodiversity and how biodiversity is connected to ecosystem. Like we've defined an ecosystem comprising all the organisms. So the bit of the biodiversity or the different species found in different ecosystems. So when we're talking about biodiversity has different levels. So we could talk about biodiversity at an ecosystem level, biodiversity at a species level, or biodiversity at a genetic level. So when we now maybe dig into what we should map in terms of the ecosystems. So like we said, the ecosystem could be defined in different aspects. So in here we give a few examples, but these are not just limited to this, so they can be expanded depending on the areas that somebody is working on. So for example, when you're talking about a forest, so within a forest, what do you want to map in a forest? It could be maybe the carbon sequestration zones. Of late, we're talking about how do we go about reducing emission from the atmosphere. So we're also talking about maybe using forest as areas of sinks of the carbon. So which forest is able to sink this amount of carbon? So we can map different forests so that we are able to know which area or which forest has a higher capability of sinking the carbon. And using this, we are able now to maybe go into management aspect of that forest, depending on how much carbon it's able to sink, or using those to report on the ability of a country in terms of using forests to do climate mitigation in terms of the carbon sequestration. Another part we could talk about the mountain, yeah? The different elevation of the mountain and the different attitudes for different organisms. So how do we go about maybe map a forest, and what are the distribution along the forest, map a mountain, and what are the different gradients along the mountain and the different biotas found in those areas. So maybe a country could be containing so much maybe mountains, so that you also need to know how do we go about that. Another country could be a plateau. So you see the differences in the two. So when we are mapping those two, it could be, they could use a different approach. But these are some of the things that we could look into when you're talking about the mountain. Again, when you're talking about the fauna, yeah? So just taking an example in terms of the migration of maybe, let's say, birds or wild beasts, mostly what happens in Kenya and Tanzania. So you need to map the different pathways of the fauna so that you're able to know maybe the resources shared between the two, or the pathway that the animal is supposed to follow. That way it becomes easy for you to manage the different aspects of the fauna. Again, when you come to maybe the lake ecosystem, yeah, sometimes because of the algal bloom, you want to map this algal bloom so that you're able to tell where do we get the source of the pollution into the lakes. And this way it enables us to better manage the lake ecosystem. Also, again, the rivers, because of maybe the nutrient flow into a certain area, you need to map maybe the river flow so that you're able to know the source and the river mouth. From that, you're also able to tell the different sources of maybe pollution coming into the ocean and how you can maybe mitigate those. Again, maybe when you're mapping a river, you want to look at maybe the flooding bit of it. So with a map of maybe the areas that are potential areas for flooding, you are able to mitigate maybe a calamity that can come from the flooding of the river. You come to savanna, again, the rural areas and the different maybe habitats that it contains, and what it's maybe what the vegetation cover in those areas. You're able to map these areas so that you're able to tell if they are shrinking or they are remaining constant. With this, you are able to maybe manage in this, or you're able to allocate the different uses of the savanna. So, for example, let's say, how do you go about supporting livelihood in those areas? How do you map the tourism routes in those areas in that case? The ocean, when you come also to the ocean has different bits. So we have mangroves, we have seagrass, we have corals. So you need to map these so that you're able to know where are they found, what are the threats that these ecosystems are facing, and how do you go about maybe mitigating such threats. So these are some of the different maybe ecosystems. Those are just briefs, but I believe because of the different maybe settings of the different countries, we could have different ecosystems. So this gives us like a foundation of what the ecosystem you're talking about, what to map. So it is not limited to what we've given here. We can dig deep into the different ecosystem. You can narrow down to a specific area, and you are able to give maybe a results on that area and how we go about managing that area. So again, of the date we're talking about, maybe when you look at mangroves, when you look at wetlands, you look at rainfall. So this can be scaled down ecosystem that you look into, trying to understand what's happening in those and how do you go about managing those areas. So we won't have question now. Maybe you just have the question in the Q&A, and then we will have all of those at the end of the session. So if now, because we've introduced the ecosystem, and then we've also talked about the biodiversity. So we need to look into, so why is it that we're trying to do the mapping of the ecosystem and the connection between the ecosystem and the biodiversity. Of late, we're talking about maybe the biodiversity, the decrease in biodiversity using different reports, IPBES, IUCN is giving us reports. So you read quite a number of articles showing you that we are expecting our biodiversity should be stable, but most of the reports are showing that there are different challenges that our biodiversity are facing. So unless we understand what these threats are, when it comes to conservation, it might be very difficult to know what are we conserving. So in this session, again, I will give you maybe a brief on the biodiversity challenges and maybe aspect on how we can use those to do the conservation bit of it. So bio, maybe I will not go into definition of this, but in simple terms, bio means life, diversity, the variety, yeah? So the different variety of life we have, and maybe assuming we have birds, we have animals, we have reptiles, so all these are different biodiversity, and each and every one could be faced by a different challenge. So again, the levels of biodiversity, I mentioned this earlier, but you can see how these are interrelated. So the ecosystem biodiversity, the bigger umbrella, you come to the species. So from a species, then you come to the genetic biodiversity. So you need to understand all this so that it becomes easy for you. So when you're doing maybe an allocation of an area, so to conserve a species, you know what it entails and what's maybe the interaction of the species and the surrounding ecosystem. So the importance of biodiversity, I think this is quite widely known by different people. So biodiversity helps in different actions that different countries can come together and be able to work around those. So the GBF gives us a detailed pathway of how do we maybe go about maybe doing ecosystem conservation, and in so doing, we achieve the biodiversity conservation, or we mitigate the losses that are found within the biodiversity. So why the Kunming-Montreal? So the original host, or the Kunming-Montreal, maybe some people might not know the two ones, the Kunming-Montreal. Those are two cities in two different countries, Kunming in China, then Montreal in Canada. So the discussion started in China, but ended, was concluded in Montreal. So that's why it's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity. So it has, we have the overarching goals, like 4 goals. Then from these goals, we have now the targets. So each goal has its own objective. So goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and then the different targets that are found in those. So we have 4 goals, and then we have 23 targets. So the goals, we're looking into achieving those goals by 2050, but the targets, the 23 targets, we're hoping to achieve them by 2030. So when we look into goal 1, halting human-induced extinction of threatened species, you go to goal 2 on sustainable use and management of biodiversity, goal 3, fair sharing of the benefit from biodiversity, goal 4, adequate means of implementing the GBF and maybe accessible to all the parties. So all these are linked, and once now expounded into the different targets, we are able to see how we go into or how we meet the GBF targets. So we have the 23 targets, each of them with different aspects being looked into. So when maybe I won't go into each and every target, but what we can see is each target or each one of them is arranged in a way that it gives maybe try to solve a certain aspect. So looking, for example, in target 1, 2, and 3, it's looking at maybe how do we go about conserving the ecosystem. So target 1 talking about spatial planning, target 2 talking about restoration, target 3 talking about conservation, meeting 30 by 30. So all these targets, I think, will be, we are not going to discuss all the targets, but you are tripartite at looking at the different materials that we shared, and you'll be able to see how the different targets can relate to one another. So for this course, we'll mostly dive into target 3, which my colleague will be talking about after this. So we have different targets that will be, we have the 23 targets, so you are tripartite of looking at them, but the one we'll be looking at mostly is on target 3. Yeah, target 7, you thought target 8, minimize impact of climate change, biodiversity, target 9. Then also among the targets also gives you a part where different people come into play, different partnership come into play. So I will urge that everyone look at the different targets, and if other questions arise during your reading, then post them to our community and we'll be able to answer this. So this gives us like a foundation of the course, and also gives us the reason as to why we're taking up this course, so that we're also able to work towards achieving the different international conventions that are out there. So my colleague will take the next bit and we'll dig deep into target 3. Destruction. This is common when you find an area is being destroyed to accommodate maybe agriculture. We had California wildfire. That's also another case we could talk about. Then the pollution bit of it, I think this common. It's common now. It's not something that we can debate about. So it's something that people need to understand. Within maybe the pollution bit could be different from each and every maybe person's perspective. While you are maybe in a rural area, the pollution aspect could be different from when you are in an urban area. Also from country to country. So these are some of the things that the people will need to understand what is it that airing in our country in terms of the pollution, and how is this one contaminating the ecosystem that we talk that surrounds us. Then we come into the climate change. Yeah? The maybe too much rain, too much heat, too much the wind, the cyclones happening in different parts, the melting of ice due to high temperature. So all these change maybe the ecosystem, and once the ecosystem is changed, also the biodiversity within it. So if the biodiversity in that area is not able to adapt to the changes that have occurred, then it means that it has high vulnerability of being lost completely in that area. So the overexploitation, like we said, we've seen even some animals go almost extinct within our lifetime, simply because an area that the animal was dependent on has been encroached completely. Only a small space is left for it to to deal with. You come to the oceans, for example, the ghost nets. Those are that entangle maybe the fish, the turtle. So these are some of the things that we're talking about being when we overexploit. So many nets are left in the ocean and nobody is collecting them. So it becomes a huge problem for the marine species. The introduction of invasive species, we have the Lake Victoria is being consumed by the water hyacinth. So these are some of the things that we're talking about causing the lake and its ability to sustain the biodiversity in that area. So these are not limited to only these. These are just examples. So it's upon maybe different people to check within our country or within our region what's maybe invasive is this area and how do we go about remedying that. So with biodiversity change, what is it that we can do? So we're talking about all these challenges that we see in biodiversity. So that it becomes easy for us to maybe mitigate this, we need to maybe the map how extensive these challenges to biodiversity are. So then that also forms part of what we're talking about mapping for ecosystem. So when you are mapping, we also want to map so that we're able to work or deal with the different challenges that the biodiversity face. So all maybe we are all called to maybe work towards maybe improving our biodiversity. So the course will go into different aspects, talking about the challenges, mapping, so that we are able to manage these challenges. So you can see the connection between the ecosystem and the biodiversity bit of it. So all of these, when we package them, we come into this international call. Now we're talking about the KMGBF, right? So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity. So we've talked about the different ecosystem. We've talked about the biodiversity aspect of it and the challenges that are found here. So for the countries or for the world to be able to handle or to deal with this, so that's why we're having now the global biodiversity framework. That gives us a platform on how, on a global scale, how can we come into one space and try to solve for the different challenges that our biodiversity are facing. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity, commonly known as the GBF. Yeah. So an agreement adopted in 2020 during the UN Biodiversity Conference or the COP15 in Montreal, Canada. So the framework is an elevation of what was there before, the Aichi targets that was running from 2010 to 2020. Yeah. So after evaluation in 2020, we realized that still some of the targets were not met. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity elevates what was there or what was not achieved, and then tries to scale it down into different aspects or highlighting or the different actions that different countries can come together and be able to work around those. So the GBF gives us a detailed pathway of how do we maybe go about doing ecosystem conservation, and in so doing, we achieve the biodiversity conservation, or we mitigate the losses that are found within the biodiversity. So why the Kunming-Montreal? So the original host, or the Kunming-Montreal, maybe some people might not know the two ones, the Kunming-Montreal. Those are two cities in two different countries, Kunming in China, then Montreal in Canada. So the discussion started in China, but ended, was concluded in Montreal. So that's why it's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity. So it has, we have the overarching goals, like 4 goals. Then from these goals, we have now the targets. So each goal has its own objective. So goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and then the different targets that are found into. So we have 4 goals, and then we have 23 targets. So the goals, we're looking into achieving those goals by 2050. But the targets, the 23 targets, we're hoping to achieve them by 2030. So when we look into goal 1, halting human-induced extinction of threatened species, we go to goal 2 on sustainable use and management of biodiversity, goal 3, fair sharing of the benefit from biodiversity, goal 4, adequate means of implementing the GBF and maybe accessible to all the parties. So all these are linked, and once now expounded into the different targets, we are able to see how we go into or how we meet the GBF targets. So we have the 23 targets, each of them with different aspects being looked into. So when maybe I won't go into each and every target, but what we can see is each target or each one of them is arranged in a way that it gives maybe try to solve a certain aspect. So looking, for example, in target 1, 2, and 3, it's looking at maybe how do we go about conserving the ecosystem. So target 1 talking about spatial planning. Target 2 talking about restoration. Target 3 talking about conservation, meeting 30 by 30. So all these targets, I think, will be we are not going to discuss all the targets, but you are looking at the different materials that we shared, and you'll be able to see how the different targets can relate to one another. So for this course, we'll mostly dive into target 3, which my colleague will be talking about after this. So we have different targets that will be we have the 23 targets, so you are at liberty of looking at them, but the one we'll be looking at mostly is on target 3. Yeah, target 7, you go target 8, minimize impact of climate change, biodiversity. Target 9. Then also among the targets also gives you a part where different people come into play, different partnership come into play. So I will urge that everyone look at the different targets, and if other questions arise during your reading, then post them to our community and we'll be able to answer this. So this gives us like a foundation of the course, and also gives us the reason as to why we're taking up this course, so that we're also able to work towards achieving the different international conventions that are out there. So my colleague will take the next bit, and we'll dig deep into target 3.
Hi, my name is Eric Juma. Thank you, Josephat, for the good presentation. For me, I'm going to dig deep into target 3, which we normally call 30 by 30, conserving 30% of land, fresh water, and oceans by the year 2030. So I'll start by expounding on where these targets came from. They came from the UNCBD, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which was established in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro during the Earth Summit. And it's now a legally binding international treaty, which we have to adhere to. And it was adopted by the Conference of Parties. These are the countries and countries that are under the convention. And the objectives of the UNCBD is to ensure that there is conservation of biological diversity, ensure that there is sustainable use of biological diversity components, and to ensure that there is fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the genetic resources. So the strategy, UNCBD has had various strategy, and as my colleague mentioned before the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we had what we call Aichi targets, which ran from 2010 to 2020. And now we have the KMGBF, which will run from ideally from 2020 to 2030, with the goals set for 2050. But it was adopted in 2022 during the COP15 in Montreal, Canada. And therefore, even the period of achieving this target is less than what was envisioned, because it was envisioned to be 10 years, but it was adopted in 2022, which left us with the 8 years for us to achieve the target. So, and the targets are very highly ambitious, as we shall be looking into. And the vision of KMGBF is to live in harmony with nature by 2050, which is also very ambitious. So, and the reason why this KMGBF framework was established is because of the declining of biodiversity at unprecedented rates, despite the ongoing conservation efforts. That is what meant the framework to be established and to be made ambitious. So I want to go into all the targets, but I'll focus on target 3, which was mentioned by my colleague. And the target 3 is aimed at achieving 30% of land waters, and by waters I mean the fresh waters, inland waters, and the seas. The target has various components, which I will dive into. It focuses on conserving at least 30%, which I have mentioned. It also focuses on the crucial biodiversity and ecosystem services. It focuses on effective, representative, and equitable governance of biodiversity areas. It recognizes the indigenous and traditional territories, and it integrates conservation into landscapes, seascapes, and oceans. It also allows sustainable use only if it aligns with conservation goals. And it respects the rights of indigenous people and local communities. By now, we should be understanding that protected areas are the mainstay of conservation. And for this particular target, we shall be looking ahead on the headline indicator of the target. But it focuses mostly on protected areas and what we call conserved areas. And protected areas is defined as a geographically defined area, which is designated or regulated and managed to achieve specific conservation objectives. That is the definition of the CBD. So any area which is designated or regulated and is being managed to achieve conservation objective qualify to be a protected area. And then we have what we call other effective area-based conservation measures, which we normally abbreviate as OECMs. These are also defined as geographically defined areas other than the protected areas, which are governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in-situ conservation of biodiversity with the associated ecosystem functions and services. So these are areas beside the protected areas, which are being managed to achieve long-term conservation outcome. And we shall be looking at potential areas which can qualify to be referred to as OECMs. And lastly, we have indigenous and traditional territories. We have areas that we normally abbreviate as ICCAs. These are territories or areas that are being conserved by the indigenous people, and they are also achieving long-term conservation outcome. So let us look at protected areas and OECMs and their benefits to conservation. The first one is that protected areas and OECMs, they safeguard habitats and species populations. When you talk about conservation, what comes to your mind is the habitats of the species and how they are being the numbers have been sustained. So protected areas and the OECMs contribute greatly on safeguarding these habitats and ensuring that the species populations are maintained. They also deliver ecosystem services like water purification, carbon storage, medication, and etc. And lastly, they provide multiple benefits to people, including cultural, recreational, and even religious services. Let us look at the key elements of Target 3. Of course, the first one is conserving the 30% of terrestrial, inland, and marine areas. But we have other components within the same targets that need to be considered to achieve that target. For example, we have areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services. These are areas that have species richness or areas that have threatened species. These areas need to be put into account when we are conserving biodiversity. We have threatened biomes and habitats. Those habitats which are under threat need to be considered in biodiversity conservation. Habitats of particular importance. We have habitats which are used for various purposes, like breeding grounds. These are areas which need to be considered in conservation. And then you have critical areas for ecosystem services. As you know, the main goal is to live in harmony with nature. We benefit from nature, and we should ensure that we conserve the nature. So we have areas which provide us with ecosystem services, the benefits from the nature. These areas need to be considered during conservation. Then we have the other component, the third component, which is effectively conserved and managed. So as much as we talk about conserving 30%, which is coverage of the areas that we conserve, we have the quality of conservation also being considered as a component of Target 3. And we don't only focus on the area, but we also focus on how effectively these areas are being managed. They should be managed in a way that will help them achieve a positive long-term conservation outcome. Then we have another component, rights of indigenous people and local communities. As we conserve, we need to respect the rights of indigenous people and local communities. We should carry out our conservation work in ways that respect the culture of the indigenous people, in ways that respect the rights of the indigenous people and their territories. Then the fifth component is on ecological representativeness. Protected areas and the OECMs should contain adequate samples of the full range of existing ecosystems, ecological processes, and regions. We have a component on well-connected. These areas that we conserve should be connected through corridors as well as integrated into wider landscapes and seascapes. This means that as we conserve our areas, as we manage the protected areas, we shouldn't protect or manage these areas in isolation, but we should ensure that these areas are linked to each other. And linking to each other means that the adaptation of the wildlife that we are conserving or whatever we are conserving is improved and enhanced. So connectivity is a very big component of the target. Then we have equitably governed. Governance is also a very important part of the targets. We have to involve stakeholders in the management and the governance of these protected and conserved areas, and ensure that the stakeholders, including the communities and even the indigenous people, benefit from these protected and conserved areas. Lastly, we have sustainable use that is consistent with conservation objectives. As we use biological diversity, as we use the resources that come from biological diversity, we should ensure that we use them in a sustainable way that is only consistent with conservation objectives. Let us look at the indicators of Target 3. We have the headline indicator which is the coverage of protected areas and OECMs. So when reporting against Target 3 or when monitoring the progress towards achievement of Target 3, the main indicator or the headline indicator that we look at is the coverage of protected areas and the other effective area-based conservation measures. But as I told you, this target has other components that are very key to ensuring that there is quality within the areas we conserve. We have other component indicators like the protected area coverage of key biodiversity areas, KBAs. We have protected area management effectiveness. This is the assessment of how well the protected and conserved areas are being managed. We have the protected area connectivity. How well are these areas connected to each other, and how well are they integrated in the wider landscape and seascapes? We have protected area connectedness index. We have the red list of ecosystems connectivity indicator. We have the number of protected areas that have completed a site-level assessment of governance and equity, SAGE, and we have the species protection index. Thank you so much. Let's go to the second presentation and understand more about the protected areas. So let us dive deep into understanding protected areas. As mentioned before, protected areas are defined as geographical areas which are recognized, dedicated, managed through legal or other effective means to ensure long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. These are areas that range from national parks to nature reserves to marine protected areas to wildlife sanctuaries. Protected areas or protected and conserved areas can be, they have different levels of protection. And the IUCN has defined, has come up with categories of grouping these protected areas in terms of the levels of protection. So we have the first category that was identified by IUCN as a strict nature reserve. The category number is, code is 1A. These are areas which have the highest level of protection, restricted access, and are normally used for scientific research and monitoring. Then you have wilderness areas, which are categorized as 1B. They are unmodified or slightly modified areas, which also have restricted access. And you have category 2, which is national parks. These are large natural or near natural areas of ecosystem protection. This is the third level of protection. They have restricted access, but a few activities are allowed inside, like hospitality services are allowed within the protected areas. Then you have natural monuments. These are unique natural features. Then we have habitat or species management areas. These are the areas which are used to manage species involving regular interventions. Then you have protected landscapes and seascapes. These are significant ecological, biological, and cultural areas with cultural values. And then we have the lastly protected areas with sustainable use of natural resources. These are areas that conserve ecosystems and habitats. Some of the threats to biodiversity are deforestation and land conversion. We have illegal wildlife trade. We have climate change and poor management and funding gaps. Then let us go look deeper into the OECMs, other effective area-based conservation measures. These are sites outside the protected areas that deliver the effective and long-term in situ conservation of biodiversity. They support associated ecosystem functions and services and promote cultural, spiritual, socioeconomic, and other locally relevant values. So OECM complement protected areas. As you know, research says that 65% of wildlife exist outside the formal protected areas. So most of the wildlife actually exist in most of these areas, including the OECMs. So the focus is on the biodiversity conservation outcome, and the concept was formally adopted in CBD decision 14/8 in 2018. So it is a relatively recent concept that was introduced in the conservation. Currently, only 15 countries have reported OECMs to the World Database on other effective area-based conservation measures, and more countries need to recognize and report these areas. So there are a number of similarities between protected areas and OECMs. For example, both of them are geographically defined by boundaries. The governance and the management respect the rights of the indigenous people, the rights of local communities. They both contribute to long-term in situ conservation, and management integrates cultural, spiritual, and other local values. IUCN criteria for OECM indicate that OECMs need to have effective conservation of biodiversity values. The governance and management of these areas should ensure gender equity. They also state that they should be recognized via transparent processes. So all these OECM sites need to be recognized through transparent processes. That these areas are not legally designated as PA, but achieve long-term conservation outcomes. And lastly, these areas should achieve long-term maintenance of biodiversity values. IUCN has also tried to group these areas in terms of management governance types. In terms of governance types, we have these areas, protected and conserved areas, which are managed by governments. They have a governance by governments, and these include areas that are managed by the national governments, or what we call federal governments. And we have areas which are managed by subnational governments, and areas which are managed by delegated institutions. The second level of governance is shared governance. These are areas which have 2 or more institutions governing them. For example, we have transfrontier conservation areas, or what we call transboundary conservation areas, where 2 governments or 2 countries manage the same area. Then we have another level of private governance, where areas are managed by individual owners or NGOs, and lastly, or even local communities and indigenous people. Then we have benefits of OECMs. OECMs expand conservation coverage. As I have mentioned, the headline indicator for target 3 is coverage of protected areas and OECMs. So, and as I told you, 65% of wildlife exists outside the formal protected areas. So if we are to achieve target 3, then we need to recognize, identify, and report OECMs. They also engage diverse stakeholders. Most of the OECMs are either being managed by the communities or indigenous people or civil societies, which ensures that the efforts of other stakeholders in conservation are also recognized. They also support sustainable livelihoods. OECMs provide ecosystem services which support livelihoods. They fill ecological gaps and corridors. Most of the OECMs are used as corridors where the wildlife can migrate from maybe one protected area to another. They enhance resilience to climate change. These are areas where the wildlife migrate to when the protected areas are facing climate change effects, and they also recognize diverse governance. So by reporting OECMs, the indigenous lands and community conserved areas, private lands are recognized as important elements of conservation. IUCN has come up with the various steps to identify OECMs. And the very first one is preliminary mapping of candidate areas. These are areas that are potential areas that can qualify to become OECMs. Then the second step is engaging stakeholders and assessing the rights. And then the third step is evaluating the areas against the OECM criteria. The fourth one is documentation of governance and management of that particular site. And lastly is the official recognition and listing of the area. Some of the potential areas that can qualify to be OECMs include the indigenous and community conserved areas, what we normally call ICCAs, sacred natural sites, military training grounds, watershed protection zones, private lands and conservation agreements, fishery no-take zones. Then we have categories of biodiversity indicators, which I mentioned up there. They can be categorized in terms of the species. They can be categorized in terms of ecosystem, and they can be categorized according to genetic diversity. In conclusion, I want to say that protected areas and OECMs are complementary tools for biodiversity conservation. Clear definitions and governance are critical. Key biodiversity indicators provide measurable outcomes, and monitoring enables adaptive management and improved results. So thank you so much. We'll be taking questions at the end of the session. I want to invite my colleague to proceed with the sources of biodiversity data. Thank you.
At this moment, let me invite Jazz. So it's our partner from UNEP WCMC. And we're collaborating in terms of data. So Jazz, kindly you're welcome to give us a presentation on data sources, protected area, conservation area data sets. You're welcome.
Hi, Julius. Many thanks. Thank you so much to our CMRD for putting on this really valuable and timely training and for inviting me to be a part of it. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Upton, and I am a Programme Officer at the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, or UNEP WCMC for short. A quick introduction to UNEP WCMC. So we are a centre of the UN Environment Programme, and we focus on biodiversity and nature's contributions to society and the economy. And we've worked for over 45 years with local institutions, governments, indigenous peoples, local communities, and stakeholders at the regional and country levels in support and advocating for trusted science, data tools, and knowledge to be used for policy and decision making. So today I'm going to present on the monitoring and reporting of data on protected and conserved areas at the global scale, which will include a brief introduction to the Protected Planet Initiative, its databases, and its role in tracking progress towards Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is this ambitious framework that has been set under the Convention on Biological Diversity to reshape the world's relationship with biodiversity. It is a platform for collating and sharing data on protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs worldwide. So you probably are all familiar with protected areas, but OECMs are areas that are outside of protected areas that are still really important for biodiversity conservation, but that might not necessarily be managed for conservation purposes. So the Protected Planet Initiative is a joint product of the IUCN and of the UN Environment Programme, and it's managed by UNEP WCMC. And you can see the platform on the right-hand side of the screen. So the online platform allows users to explore the information that's collected on protected and conserved areas, either through the platform itself or through the data that can be downloaded. The platform also provides key resources and tools to inform on the current state of protected and conserved areas worldwide. Protected Planet hosts several databases. The first one is the most well-known. This is the World Database on Protected Areas, and it's the most comprehensive global database on terrestrial and marine protected areas. The second is the World Database on Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures, or the WD-OECM, which collates data on the world's OECMs. Both of these databases are spatial databases, so they include information on the location and boundaries of the protected areas and OECMs that have been reported, as well as various descriptive information for each of those sites. Another database is the Global Database on Protected Area Management Effectiveness, or the GDPARME, which collects information on where these areas that I've just mentioned, protected areas, have had assessments on how effective their management is. So these assessments are reported to the GDPARME. And finally, and slightly separately, Protected Planet also has close links to the ICCA registry, which is a database of territories and areas conserved by Indigenous peoples and local communities, where communities themselves provide information on the areas they're conserving and governing. Data is provided to these databases from a variety of sources. There are over 400 different data providers, the majority of which are national governments, but also there's data provided by convention secretariats, such as the World Heritage or the Ramsar Convention. Data is provided by Indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as private actors. And we also collaborate closely with regional entities who facilitate data collection from a regional level and feed it up to the Protected Planet databases at the global level. In the Eastern and Southern Africa region, the regional entity who facilitate data collection are OECMRD through their Regional Centre of Excellence for Eastern and Southern Africa. They facilitate the flow of information from the national to the regional to the global scale. And they do this by supporting the collation of data and building the capacity of national stakeholders across the region. So this important collaboration between OECMRD and UNEP WCMC has gone on for over 6 years and was initiated under the BioPharma programme and continues to this day. And we highly appreciate the leadership of OECMRD, who greatly support protected and conserved areas in the region through capacity building, knowledge sharing, and ensuring the region's data is accurate and up to date. So why is it important to report data and collect all of this data? Firstly, bringing all of this data together in one place allows us to track progress towards international biodiversity targets that are related to protected and conserved areas. So when it comes to assessing those targets, accurate information allows us to identify gaps or limitations in the current network, but it also means that we can use it to prioritize and focus future conservation efforts. The WDPA and the WD-OECM are formally mandated by the Convention on Biological Diversity, and these databases provide the headline indicator tracking progress towards Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So Target 3 is this target that is aiming to effectively protect 30% of the planet by 2030. And so these databases are tracking progress towards this target. In addition, the databases are also used to track progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals 14 and 15, which are life below water and life on land. And this is alongside data on key biodiversity areas. So having all this data in one place allows us to accurately track how well the world is progressing towards achieving these targets. In general, it's also important to note that the information can and is being used by a wide range of stakeholders to inform decisions and to develop policies and guide business and conservation planning. And having this data visible also provides recognition for the work and commitment of governments, private individuals, organizations and communities whose contributions to conservation deserve to be celebrated. Every 2 years, we publish the Protected Planet reports, which use the data that's in these databases to provide an update on the state of the world's protected and conserved areas, and that provide a progress report towards the global targets that I've just mentioned. The report that was published in 2024 was the first official assessment of progress towards Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So it was an opportunity to highlight achievements, so where we might be achieving elements and towards that target, but also it was an opportunity to highlight where we might need greater ambition. So the report showed that while the global networks of protected and conserved areas are expanding and are moving towards that 30% coverage target, the report showed that progress must be accelerated to meet this target by 2030, and that includes nearly doubling land coverage and tripling ocean coverage. And what's really important is that this growth in coverage must be matched by even greater efforts to meet the target's other elements. So I think we'll be introduced to it soon, but there are many elements of the Target 3 that are related to ensuring the quality of these systems of protected and conserved areas. So it's not just about how much of the world they cover, but how effective are these areas? You know, how well are they managed? How equitably are they governed? How well are they contributing to biodiversity conservation? And another really important element of the target is whether these areas are upholding human rights, especially for Indigenous peoples and local communities. And the Protected Planet report in 2024 is telling us that we don't have enough information to be able to fully assess these elements of the target. I wanted to quickly highlight the State of Protected and Conserved Areas in East and Southern Africa report that we worked on with RCMRD, IUCN and other partners, and which provides an overview of how the Eastern and Southern Africa region is managing and governing protected and conserved areas. Sorry, and then finally, this is my final slide. So I wanted to highlight a few next steps, and particularly those that are related to this training, in the sense that a training that is focused on the development of GIS and how that can contribute to global targets. I think some of the really key things is that reporting accurate and regular data still remains a challenge, but this is going to be really important for ensuring that we can make decisions on the best available data and that we can accurately track progress towards global targets related to protected and conserved areas, including Target 3. However, this is still a challenge. So yeah, there is also an uneven capacity to use GIS and report spatial data. And so this makes RCMRD's course on applying GIS really timely and valuable. Many areas governed by non-state actors, including private actors, Indigenous peoples and local communities, are under-recognised and under-reported. And so we are working with RCMRD and others to support non-state actors to be able to map and report the areas that they govern and with their consent. And this is really important for ensuring that their biodiversity stewardship is visible and that it can be appropriately recognised within the implementation and the monitoring of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And then my final point is that there is this global lack of data on other effective area-based conservation measures. So you might be introduced to these soon, but so these areas, though they are likely to be very widespread, the OECM concept was only relatively recently introduced. So as of August 2025, only 15 countries and territories have recognised and reported OECM data to the World Database on OECMs. So this lack of data makes it difficult to be able to set global and regional priorities in terms of conservation, but also to be able to track progress towards Target 3. However, we are seeing that this is rapidly evolving as many other countries are now beginning processes to identify and map and report these areas, which means we're beginning to get an idea of just how important these areas, OECMs, are going to be in helping us to achieve global targets and to achieve Target 3. So I will finish there. Thank you very much for listening. We work really closely with RCMRD to provide technical support on the mapping and reporting of protected and conserved areas. So please feel free to reach out should you have any questions. And thank you for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the training. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jez. I hope our participants now understand why we need data on protection and protected areas and other effective conservation areas. And thank you for your rallying call in stating that we are having challenges in data, specifically on OECMs. And basically, as we undertake this training, we anticipate that the different partners that are participating in this training will be able to work with us, collaborate with us in terms of data provision as we move forward towards enhancing conservation. Thank you, Jez. Any questions to Jez? Please raise your hand. Or okay, I'm being informed that we can type our questions in the Q&A. Q&A. Let's see what is there. Yeah, there is a question, Jaz. Are these databases freely accessible to students who may not be part of the stakeholder organizations?
Very good question. Yes, the databases are free and publicly available on the Protected Planet platform. So please do go and explore, and you can download the data and explore it in spatial data formats, so in geodatabase and shapefile formats. You can also download it as a CSV file and explore it in platforms like Excel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jaz. Seems we don't have a question, any other additional question, and should we have it, I think we'll be channeling it. I hope you'll be online, or you're leaving.
I can stay online. Thanks, Julius.
Thank you. Yeah, please, you have any other questions, please, let's have it on the Q&A.
So I think we can take a few questions from the participants. So you can, I think you can, if you are okay, you can raise your hand and we give you a chance to ask any question that you might have. And we apologize for going beyond the scheduled time, so we can take 2 questions. But I can see most of the questions that were asked were on the chat. Most of them have been answered. Yes, I can see Gabriel Nguira. You can unmute yourself and you can let us know where you're coming from. And yeah, shoot your question.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Nguira from Malawi, Lilongwe.
Yes, Gabriel.
My question is, I didn't just get it clear on the main difference between OECM and the protected areas. What is the major difference between these two? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. So the main difference between protected areas and OECMs, they are more or less cover the same, the final objective is conservation. But for protected areas, these are officially gazetted areas, for example, the national parks, or some of the game reserves. But for OECMs, as my colleague shared in the previous presentation, There's areas like military camps that have been identified, but their original role was not for conservation, but they have been set aside and they end up achieving conservation in the long run.
Thank you, that has been understood, sir.
Thank you, Gabriel. We can take Simon Tembo. Hello, Simon. You can unmute yourself. I think as we sort Simon, we can hear from Leonard Orondo.
Thank you. Are you getting me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the presentation. I just want to make a comment, then maybe ask a question.
Okay.
I think the comment I would like to make is that so far the very good presentations presented across the board have relied on the IUCN classification of ecosystems, characterization of indicators. But I want to point out that that is just one approach. I think the development of the global atlas that will attempt to characterize and delimit global ecosystems will be a better assessment. So I think it is important for people to know that IUCN is one international NGO which has done very good work in the conservation area, but it is not the only one. The Global Atlas, I think, will provide a more comprehensive assessment. The second one is just a concern I had. The cause intends to give certificates after each model, and I believe the organizers have very good reasons for that. But I think it depends on what you want to achieve. I think it is more effective if you just give one certificate at the end of this course, because there are two reasons for most participants attending the course. One is to get the knowledge, and the other two is for the certificate to be useful. Most people, most employers do not value short certificates for several reasons. So I think a longer certificate, like a month certificate, is more useful than a 5-day or a 3-day certificate. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard, for the very good suggestions. In terms of the certificate, I think we'll take that under advisement, and we'll see what we can do. That is very good advice, and I think that was the reason why we give a chance to engage with the participants, just to get their views on this. In terms of the Global Atlas, I don't have much to say about it. Maybe my colleague Eric can respond to this.
The reason I said that is about IUCN is that there is a link between classification and mapping. If you are going to map, you need to know which classification system you are using for habitat, or which IUCN is a very good one. But I think participants should know that.
Thank you so much, Leonard, for the question. Maybe just to respond is that the IUCN classification that you are mentioning IUCN only provides standards which have been adopted at the international level. So, and as I mentioned, we are talking about target 3, which is on reporting against against the conservation of 30% of lands, waters, and seas. And under that target, we use the protected planet data to report. Of course, countries and parties have been allowed to use their own data, which means they can use any other data that they have. But one of the things that CBD wants to achieve is that they want to have standardized data. So what happens is that IUCN, what they have done, and it's something they have developed standards of just classifying the areas, the protected areas in terms of their levels of protection. Each country can have their own specific one, local ones, but for the form of for the purpose of standardization and harmonizing all the data coming from all the countries in the world, that is the reason why the IUCN categories were adopted. And this is just for standardization purposes. And then in terms of the training is running for 1 month, not 1 week. So that one, just to clarify, that the training will be running for 1 month and the module will be covering at 1 week. But of course, you have mentioned about the global atlas of ecosystems, which is a good thing. We are happy to learn from it. You can share with us. But for the purpose of just standardization and reporting towards target 3, that is this specific to target 3, that is why we are using these standards that were adopted at the global level. They were adopted, and parties are guided on how to use them to report their areas they conserve. Thank you. So let me request Brightness Luthuli to go ahead and ask the question.
Good afternoon, sir. I've already typed my question on the meeting chat, but what I wanted to find out or raise that you've identified a knowledge gap when it comes to GIS around GIS and data collection. Is there a plan to close this gap? And looking at the funding and also the equipment and the cost of the equipment that is required for data collection, especially in our African in the continent of Africa, have you looked at what that will cost and what is the plan to try and close that gap? Because we know data collection is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brightness, for the question. Yes, there's a very big gap, especially in terms of the capacity. And this was even identified at a global level, that only 30% of all the parties say they are comfortable to report, to send the 7th report, CBD reports by February 2026, which means we have 70% which have capacity issues. And CBD has what we call technical, scientific, and cooperation centers that were established to support the countries in implementing the targets and also on reporting towards each target. So these technical, scientific, and cooperation centers, which we normally call technical support centers, are supposed to assist the parties in bridging the gap, the capacity gap that they have. So this training is also aimed at that, ensuring that we bridge the gap, capacity gap, in terms of the knowledge and skills on mapping conservation areas using GIS and remote sensing skills. But the technical, scientific, and cooperation centers are doing what we call the needs assessments to identify the capacity gaps that the parties have. And then they have a mandate to mobilize the funds to address the gaps. So if you feel that you have capacity gaps and you need support, feel free to reach out to us. You can write to us and request for the support that you need. RCMRD is one of the technical, scientific, and cooperation centers that is supporting 11 countries. You can get all this information from the CBD website. Just go there and you'll see which center covers you. So you can write to your center and request for the support, and the center will respond to it. If they don't have funds, they need to mobilize the funds to ensure that they come and they capacitate you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We can take one more question from Lynette Obare. Lynette, go ahead and ask your question. Just unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I've just managed to unmute myself. My name is Lynette Obare. I'm a PhD student and very keen on working on inventorizing biodiversity in forest conserved areas. For instance, I'm looking at the Mau forest in Kenya, and I am actually interested in supporting an inventory that incorporates local knowledge into resource utilization, natural resource utilization, especially energy utilization by local communities. And I'm interested. My issue is within the Mau, it's a contested territory with undefined land tenure. The OECM classification of governance of protected areas recognizes indigenous protected areas. But in the instance of the Mau forest, the Ogiegs are actually being evicted from the forest, which is also a very important ecosystem and a water catchment for the country. So my concern is how best would you propose that information about conservation and conservation of such territories be done so that they actually recognize indigenous knowledge, their utilization needs, and also how that can be incorporated into collecting data using GIS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynette, for the question. I know that you follow through the KMGBF targets and the goals. And the one component that was included under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is the respecting the indigenous and local communities' rights and ownership. So one of the things is that it is a global mandate. It's a global obligation that all the parties, including Kenya, should adhere to. It is an obligation that the government should adhere to. And even when reporting this data towards to the WCMC, one of the conditions or the requirements is that the data provider needs to indicate that they have the consent and the blessings of the indigenous people and local communities. So this is something that we can do. And sensitization is also one thing that we need to do. But of most importance is that we need parties and all the stakeholders to conserve biodiversity in ways that respect the indigenous people and the local communities, their rights, the ownership of the land. So it is a responsibility of all of us, me and you, to ensure that we all are obligated to respect the rights of indigenous people and local communities. I may not have all the answers, but I think we can maybe go offline and we will discuss it further. Thank you. To direct you to the RCOE community. Please go to the RCOE community if you have any questions, if you need any clarifications, let us engage in the RCOE community. Thank you so much and have a good evening, have a good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Thank you.